Hello, everyone. We'll get started here now. I'm Sue Chaffee, and I am new to the Alberta School of Business. I joined in July as the Assistant Dean of Advancement. I have a couple of introductions to make, and then I'll hand it off to our moderator to get us started. So thank you so much for joining us. We acknowledge that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continue to enrich our vibrant communities. We are happy to see that we've had a great turnout today for what I promise will be a great discussion about leading in a hybrid workforce. With all that is happening in this global pandemic, I'm confident there'll be great takeaways and tips for how to effectively lead in an uncertain environment. While we have questions for our panel, we hope that you do as well, and we invite you to submit any questions that you have by using the Q&A icon on the Zoom taskbar. It's just right in the middle next to chat. And we hope that we can get to your questions near the end of the discussion. Our panel discussion today will be moderated by a proud Alberta School of Business alumna, Jane Helford, founder of Helford Consulting, Inc. Jane is driven to help organizations and leaders achieve their goals by leveraging her experience as an entrepreneur, board member, chartered accountant, CEO, and her passion for leadership development. Jane brings a breadth of experience to individuals and teams she works with. Through her business, Helford Consulting, Jane serves organizations through a range of services focused on leadership and governance transition through in-person and virtual training, advisory services, and professional speaking. Jane is an active board member of Farm Credit Canada, where she is the chair. She is also the chair of Alpha Phenomics, and she's also a board member of the Sawridge Group of Companies. Welcome, Jane. We are thrilled that you are able to join us today.
Thank you very much, Sue. It is just such a pleasure to be here, and just watching the chat as people were coming in, starting to see some familiar names. So for those of you who I've met before, it's nice to see you virtually, at least on your name. And for those of you that I haven't met before, thank you for being part of our School of Business alumni family and just really interested citizens. This is such an important topic as we all struggle with 2020, the pandemic, and how do we lead in our organizations. So I'm incredibly thankful to this great group of panelists. I think when we conceived this idea, maybe we were hoping that by December, the pandemic would be over and we could all go somewhere tropical, but clearly it's not over. And their expertise today, I think, will really help our organizations, not only in these last few weeks of the calendar year, but as we approach 2021. So let me introduce each of them. And once I'm done that introduction, you'll see them all come on screen here, and then we'll get to their expertise. So let me start with Kevin Uebelein. Kevin is the CEO of AIMCO, and he has had that role since 2015. You may be familiar with AIMCO. They have over $100 billion of assets under management. But what you might not know about Kevin is he is currently the chair of the Business Advisory Council for the Alberta School of Business. So thank you, Kevin, for your service with that. And we can't wait to hear about what AIMCO is doing with respect to hybrid workplaces. Our next panelist is Haylee Ritchie. Haylee is a manager of business consulting for E&Y. She is focused on government and public sector and has held that role for about 6 years. Haylee is a proud alumna of the Alberta School of Business, graduating with a BCom with distinction in human resources and finance. And so we're going to hear from Haylee as far as her experiences within the workplace today and sort of a different generational lens on hybrid workplaces. And then our final panelist is Dr. Karen MacNeill. Karen is a performance consultant, psychologist, speaker, and advisor. She operates her own practice, MacNeill Performance Consulting. And you may be interested to know that she's the lead mental performance consultant for the Canadian Olympic Committee, and she's the co-founder of headversity. And something I learned about Karen today on social media is that just yesterday, she was awarded the Women's Executive Network Canada's top 100 most powerful women. So congratulations, Karen. And I'll ask all three of you to join us now on screen, and now we'll get started on our panel. All right, it looks like we have everybody on screen. So welcome everybody to our little virtual family today. So instead of spending more time on your biographies, I just wanted to ask each of you to give just a couple minutes perspective on, what's your organization's approach to the workplace today, and where do you think it's going in the next 6 months? And Haylee, let's start with you.
Thanks, Jane. So a little bit of context, EY is a global professional services firm. We do everything, accounting, tax, consulting, those types of things. But you can imagine that, our workforce under normal circumstances would spend most of their time working directly with clients in their place of work. And that can range anywhere from a boardroom to a warehouse. I've even seen some accountants out on work sites as well. But when our teams aren't working offsite with our clients, we do actually operate under a desk hoteling arrangement. So there is no long-term assigned seating with the exception of only a few employees, and that's persisted through the pandemic. Those who require access to physical files, so I think about our legal or IT department, and secondly, those who perform a function really tied to physical space. So our receptionist is always here holding up the fort, and we also have our facilities folks here too. But overall, we have a relatively flat organization, and our teams, I would say, are pretty empowered to work where they need to work in order to deliver quality work. And while this flexibility to workplace location did exist in many ways prior to the pandemic, that's not to say that EY wasn't also met with challenges in shifting our workforce to fully remote. And when I reflected on the past 10 months, EY's approach to workplace location seems to focus really on 3 key areas. The first area was around just the health and safety of our people. So that seems to be put at the heart of every decision about where and how we're working. Tactically, of course, we're doing what many of organizations are doing. We're restricting capacity. We've established very clear return to office and return to client site protocols. We even have like a self-certification tool that we do in the morning before we go to work, just to make sure that we've signed off and we're healthy to be in the office if we need to be. And then culturally, anyone who's responsible for supervising anyone is asked to be laser focused on employee well-being issues. And that ranges from physical to financial, social, and emotional. The second kind of a part of EY's approach to workplace location has been around technology. So similar to many organizations, huge investments to accelerate a lot of those new applications and infrastructure so we can collaborate remote. So much of our business really depends on working in teams and working with clients and connecting with people and building relationships. So there's been a lot of investment there. And then finally, physical space has been top of mind for EY in our approach. So EY has already started to reduce our real estate prior to the pandemic with, as I mentioned, kind of the hoteling arrangements. That's really made it maybe more smoother for us being able to transition in and out of the office. But the old ways of thinking of you needing to be seen in the office to be productive are certainly fading even faster than they were before. But in summary, I don't see the return to office as an event. It's going to be a process. Jane, you were just saying how we're moving, in and out of the office as things change. And EY's approach is one that emphasizes employees' well-being first. There's been lots of investment in technology. And then, of course, we're reimagining how we use our space forever for the next 10 years and beyond.
That's great. Thank you for that. Karen, what are you seeing in the workplace these days?
Yeah, and so my situation's unique in the sense that I consult out to a variety of different, whether it be industry or whether it be sport, and maybe I'll just paint the picture in sport because I think it has some lessons for industry. So when we look at sport, it's one of those jobs that can't be done remotely. Right. So we have, I'm the lead with the Canadian Olympic Committee. I'm the lead psychologist with Alpine Canada and with Ski Cross Canada. And so they're in the field and they're trying to compete to get Olympic berths and whatnot. And so I think in those situations, we really work on 2 things to make sure, and I agree with Haylee, number one, the safety of the individual, the health and well-being. And so looking at number one, risk assessment. And so what are the risks in the physical place that they need to go to? And number two, risk mitigation. And so there's a bit of a formula and a model that are being used to make sure that it is okay to return to sport or return to the training environment. So that would be one thing that's being considered. I think the one thing to highlight there is the physical health gets kind of front and center, but we know the psychological health and the emotional and the social is a big piece of this as well. And so what we'll find in those industries or in sport in particular is we have individuals who are saying, as a citizen, is this the right thing for me to be doing? But as a citizen, I know sport helps people. And so it's this internal battle. And so I think we really need to create the psychological safety for any individual to make the choice that is right for them. So that would be one piece. I think when I look into industry, so that's another piece of the work I do. I work with leadership teams, building resilience, building performance capacities. How do we build high performance team culture? So I have a variety of workplaces I've seen, and I think Haylee actually summed it up very well. Number one, first and foremost, the physical well-being and what does that look like? So seeing a lot of hybrid models and not a one size fits all, but looking at what's going to work for each person's scenario. I think the utilization of technology is key to that, and setting up the workspace. So I'm a co-founder of Headversity, which is developed a mental wellness platform that measures, tracks, and trains resilience. All digital platform, all digital streamed. And so how do we get to the people in that way? And then lastly, I would say connection and community and culture. That's the thing that people are trying to figure out how we do this remotely. And I know we'll be talking about that later, so I'll save that for a little bit later.
That's great. Well, Kevin, I'm sure this goes down to be one of the most legendary times in your leadership career, but where is AIMCO at these days with respect to its workplace?
Well, let me define AIMCO quickly. AIMCO, by the way, that's an acronym for Alberta Investment Management Corporation. So we're very much an Alberta-centric company, but we have investments across every asset class on a global basis. So let's just say we've got 550-ish people. Over 90% of them live and work in Alberta, and most of those in and around the Edmonton area. And then we have 3 other offices, a couple in Europe and one in Toronto. Like I think the rest of the panelists, we're working almost 100% in a virtual way right now. It's working extremely well from a productivity standpoint. And I think the observation that I would make is that at the beginning, we were afraid that we were not afraid. We wanted to see, will the technology hold up? And in reality, the technology is held up beautifully. We have the technology in place to allow us to do this, to function quite well in the short, and I guess now after, I don't know how many months we've been here, 6, 7 months, in the intermediate term. What's interesting is by forcing us into this situation, we're having to ask humans to behave a little differently. In other words, we're actually adapting to technology that was already there waiting for us to work this way. But for some of us, and I'll be the first to raise my hand, we weren't embracing the full spectrum of the technology that was there for us. So I know we're going to talk a lot about some of the more longer term challenges, including culture and how do you build strong teams when you're working like this. But I think the most interesting takeaway from my perspective has been it's stretched the human side to learn how to embrace this technology, and it's actually working, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
That's great. Thank you very much. And so for people that are watching, we would invite your questions. So I'll either weave them in as we go along here, because I can certainly see them in real time, but also leave some time at the end as well. So if you do have something, don't worry about holding back. Feel free to type it in the Q&A box. And for all the panel members, I'll direct certain questions at you, but if anybody wants to weigh in on them, feel free to jump in so we can have more of a conversation than an interrogation. How about that? So maybe, Karen, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you certainly spoke about psychological safety, but I think whether we're taking our teams back in small ways or hopefully in 2021 in more fulsome ways, Beyond the physical safety of the workplace, what kind of procedures or processes do organizations need to be thinking about across all holistic parts of health and well-being?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And where we gravitate is towards the procedural, right? How do we mitigate physical health? It's tangible, and there are some clear processes there. I think equally important, we have to take into consideration the psychological well-being. And so a lot of companies have been reaching out in terms of what is the psychology of return to work. So in order to answer that and provide a few considerations, maybe give a little bit of context. And I think the first thing we need to consider is there is a range of responses. There is the get me out of my home office as quick as I can and get me back into that workplace. There are those that are really struggling in a variety of ways or have been personally impacted. And so the whole message there is different responses require different needs. And so our different needs require different responses. And so it's not a one size fit all. And to do a bit of a deeper dive, I think what we're seeing is there's certain things such as re-entry anxiety. And this isn't anxiety about fear of contracting the virus. This is anxiety of where do I go? How do I get in the building? Where is my seat going to be? In addition to, going back to pre-established routines when we've been at home and not needed to do those commutes. So there's that piece. The other piece is being lost in the familiar. When we were thrown home, our brains lit up and we had to adapt in response, and we just did the best we could. Now that we're being thrown back into a familiar territory, we have a mental map of how that went when we went to the workplace. It is completely different now. So there's some rewiring, readjusting, but that takes a cognitive load. So given all these things, I think not just in terms of the procedures, we have to bring people up to speed in terms of preparing them mentally and emotionally. And so few considerations. Number one, have your procedures buttoned up, right? Even though if you're not exactly sure how this is going to go, paint the map. I used to play sport for Canada, and a coach said, just pick a lane, like choose a pass. People will respond around you. Same goes for procedures. It might not be the best one, but this is what you know to date. So that would be one thing. I think the second thing is attending to those individual differences as best you can. So having options depending on people's starting place and doing a bit of a psychological readiness assessment. There's some core questions you can ask around that. Number 3, connect. Team huddles, one-on-ones, the drive-by, usually we'd be in the coffee room and we'd say hi. Well, that might not occur, but just make sure we're touching base with people, and then that adaptability. And lastly, skill your people up. Resilience training, mental fitness training, equip them with the skills can be ready to face whatever comes their way. So just a few ideas.
That's fantastic. And it doesn't have to be hard. Like I was on a Zoom call the other day with somebody and she paused and said, but I really just want to go around and say, how are you really doing? And she said, some people answer fine, but she didn't accept fine. So tell me about something that's real for you. And so we don't have to be a psychologist to ask those questions, but we do have to mentally remember, if that's the item that's on the top of your agenda, pause and do that.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Haylee, it sounded interesting. You had mentioned in your opening comment that some of your supervisors have to take some training about sort of psychological safety or mental health and well-being. Can you share with us just a little bit of your own experience with that training, and what was that like for you?
Absolutely. So in terms of what we've been doing for training within EY, I think it's been mostly led by our leadership teams, and there was the immediate response when everyone was working remote to say, okay, let's pull together all the people leaders across the organization. How are we going to get through this? How are we going to lead with our culture and values? And really, we used our values as an organization and that culture of care to really drive us through those early days. And we've revisited those as a leadership team and as management teams periodically as well. And we have those health checks. We have something called counseling connect meetings. So we actually have, on top of all our direct reporting lines, a very a robust counseling network, and it's both formal and informal. And we really use that to, support our employees and allow them to access us or access their peers. So that's really the approach that we've been taking. We haven't been attending, say, a whole bunch of virtual trainings. I would love to, to hear about Karen's training around resilience and that, but really that's kind of been the focus we've taken at EY.
That's great. Thank you. So Kevin, I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction because, there's quite a diversity of people that are watching this, and some of them are probably sitting there thinking, well, I've got an organization or I've got jobs in my organization that just don't translate to virtual or remote. So how can you balance the nature of the job, the employee's preference or need to stay home? And, the big question is what's fair, what's equitable? Like, how have you thought through that?
Well, first off, you're right. There will be jobs that don't lend themselves as easily to working remote. But the first thing I would say is challenge your people and challenge your team to think outside of what they normally were thinking. When we started sending virtually 100% of our employees out, we did have some teams. We had one team, the data management team. Now you might imagine data management sounds like something you could do with a good computer anywhere, but this was one of those teams, very tight team, loved working with each other physically, and they felt very strongly that their performance was going to sag if they weren't still in the office. So they were one of the last teams that wanted to leave. And you know what happened after working closely with them, after challenging them, after maybe holding their hands, having the patience and having the infrastructure to do that. They've pulled a 180-degreer, and now they're again one of those teams that feels like they've sort of discovered something about themselves. They've discovered something about the strength of their team, and that they can still work closely together, and they don't have to share the whiteboard, in the large conference room anymore. Now we're all working, more or less in white collar jobs. We know, or office jobs, whatever you want to call them. We know that there's other roles that just aren't that easy. Some of our tech people need to be wherever the servers. Can you tell I'm not a tech person? Wherever the servers are, and they need to make sure that the red light is on or the green light is on. So we have to be, patient with that. What I find sort of very interesting is as we think about the third way, and this is how I'm trying to describe it to our employees, is we're not going back to the old way. We're going to be modulating this way that we're in right now, which is out of necessity, to a new third way. And it's going to hopefully embrace all of the learnings that we've gotten from this second way to a new way. And frankly, that scares some people. And I think it was Karen who talked about that. There's a certain percentage of our employees that want to just go back to the old way. We have an enormous number of our employees who say, actually, I like what we're doing right now. But we think that the third way, which we combine the best of both, is where we want to head, even if we can't completely define it yet. But as we start searching and defining that third way, that new way, the best of both, thinking about fairness, and both Karen and Haylee already talked about this, thinking about how do we do this in a fair way that meets the job specs that will range all over the map, that are sensitive to the personal element of our employees, but not so sensitive to the personal element of the employees that we allow the organizational productivity to take a back seat to those things. And this is a really complex sort of equation to take all those things into account and try to map out this third way. This current way, the second way we're in, it was a crisis. And so we could look everybody in the, not literally in the eye, but in the camera eye and say, we have to do this. This is what we're required to do in order to keep our employees safe. And so we could use the crisis mentality to sort of force things. When we come back, it's going to be much more about the people and how do we balance fairness with our people, with our responsibilities, to our clients and to perform. Because at the end of the day, we're businesses as well.
Absolutely. And that is going to be a tough thing, because you're right. When everybody in the whole world was told to go home and stay home, that's pretty clear and compelling message. But as your organization makes different choices and Haylee's makes different choices, and now, all the friends and groups start talking, now it's like, well, my employer is being more generous or less generous.
Right. Or not even my employer. It could be, Cindy, who used to be at the, on a workstation just on down the hall from me. She gets to continue to work from home, whereas they're making me come in 3 days a week or every other week or what have you, and that doesn't seem fair. And I think we're going to have to be both well planned, and I think Karen identified this. You have to have a plan that you can articulate. You have to be able to express to everyone why this plan makes sense. You have to explain why the plan is fair based on whatever rule set you're determining. And I think the tricky thing is you have to also say, and you know what? We might not get it 100% right the first time, because there's no manual to this. And so while we're firm, we're also going to be flexible if we find out that we've gotten something not exactly right. That's kind of a difficult message to send to people who really, most of the time, just want to say, you want me to go to section A? Okay, I'm going to section A. And now you're saying, go to section A, but there's a 20% chance we may tell you to go to section B 2 days a week because we're still figuring this out.
Karen, did you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump on that. Kevin's made some really great points. And I think just on that one point, the balance between this is what we're doing, so I'm giving you confidence and security, mixed with, but we may have to do a 180 and adapt, right? And so I think it's that whole idea of the expectation of flexibility and adaptation as you're rolling out those plans. This is what we know. We are going to listen to the needs of the organization. We're going to make sure that we're taking care of the humans in the organization. We may need to adjust if these plans, because these are theoretical right now. Evolutionary psychology, we like black and we like white. We don't like gray. We don't like the uncertainty. And so we have to, I think Kevin said it wisely, attend to the human element. I think the other aspect that I just wanted to jump on, I liked how he's saying the next. And it's not the new normal, it's the new next. And I was at a business conference and they said, this isn't changing the trends, it's just accelerating them. And so let's look at what's next and we have to adapt with that. So just want to make those comments.
That's great. And Haylee, what kind of decision-making framework are you starting to see at EY or with your clients around how is the company making these kinds of choices about who's remote, or how are we approaching this? What are you seeing in your organization?
I think the conversation that's happening right now is a perfect segue to that question. That really there's no one size fits all directive, and I've seen that at EY, because everyone's going to have their own individual challenges that they're facing in their environment. But whatever, like in terms of what EY is doing, the first step was setting kind of those guiding principles. This is how we're going to handle it, so you all feel comfortable. And one of those first principles was around, we're going to do this we're going to figure this out together in a mutually respectful way that reflects our values as an organization. So it felt familiar. I felt confident. You know what? I know the framework that's being used to make any decisions, even though I don't know the answer. I don't know if I'll be in the office tomorrow or if I'll be at home the next day. So that made me feel confident that the rules were at least going to be applied evenly to everyone in how the organization and my leadership is navigating this with myself and other managers. But what I also found was in the framework really seems to be there's some key questions that are continuously being revisited, and they've been revisited over the past several months. The first one is, how are we protecting employee health and well-being? So we've heard that a few times. I had an employee say to me just a couple weeks ago, Haylee, I'm not feeling productive from home. I'm feeling isolated. I just don't feel connected to the office. I don't feel connected to my team. And so what would surprise you is, the decision there wasn't just, okay, let's work all entirely remote. It was, okay, how do we co-develop a solution with that, team member? And I sat with them and I said, okay, what can we do? Did you feel like going into the office, or did you want to meet for a socially distanced, coffee after work, for a walk outside? And we kind of co-developed solution together. And it actually meant us coming back into the office one day a week occasionally, just so we can do that drive-by safely. The other question that seems to be guiding these decisions is how we create high-performing teams. And I know that's a word that, or a term Karen also used, and it's very frequently used at EY as well. And I was even reading some research about this, and it was interesting to find that colleagues' relationships really only suffered when they worked remote for 3 or more days a week. And I thought to myself, maybe that's the third sort of stage, as Kevin was talking about, or the third way of working, where elements of our job are, that require creativity. We come into the office and we collaborate, and we have those collisions that you can't have over a Zoom call. And then for the times where we need to get at home and do really complex work or write reports, I can do that. And so I think that's where, decisions are starting to shift us towards. And then finally, the third question that's really being asked is just on how we best serve our clients. So once we've taken care of health and well-being, once we've figured out how we're going to work together and create that community of high-performing teams, it's about how we serve the client. And that's the part where now we're almost moving into that as the focus as EY is, okay, now how do we actually work in this new world where we don't fly out on a Monday morning and to the client site and fly back Thursday night? It's definitely different trying to build a relationship remote. And we've seen a lot of success because we know clients are going through the same thing that EY is going through, but it's definitely taking a bit of a creative approach. So I don't know, I can see the decision making getting more and more granular to the individual over time, but it'll be based on a flexible set of guidelines or a flexible set of questions that we use to decide where we work. But no matter what, I think it's going to put the employee kind of at the center of those decisions.
Thank you for that. And, I just wanted to pull ahead a question that one of our audience members has asked. And, a lot of us have been talking about what it's like to be in a professional or white collar kind of job, but many of the people online have hourly employees or employees that work shift work. And so the question, and Karen, I don't know if you've seen this yet or not, but what's the balance between monitoring so that hourly workforce as far as check-in times, break times, monitoring overtime, all those pieces that are important to do as an employer, but won't sort of feel like, you're spying on them, or that they have so much latitude that they don't know what to do. So if you have any thoughts on that, one of our audience members would really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think, once again, this situation, this is the largest remote fire drill that we've had ever. Right. And so I think we can learn a lot of different tools. And I think the first thing that I think we've all spoken to is we need to challenge our own assumptions. Are we managing by presenteeism, seeing people physically at the desk, or are we managing by objectives or performance indicators? And research is rich. And when you look at the science, I have a friend who started studying this in 2003. And there's a lot of science on remote working and what's the best way in terms of engagement. And so part of it is to look at managing by objectives. When you look at presenteeism, that's defined as being at work but not working. There was a study that said a stat that we are productive or working 3 out of 8 hours a day. And so I think just being able to physically see people doesn't mean that we're on top of things. So switching a little bit more to objectives, to performance indicators. And then I really like Haylee's suggestion, and this is what we would use, is co-creating those objectives in terms of what's possible given this context. So I think it's number one, kind of challenging those things, in addition to working with the individual to see what do they feel capable of, and then really empowering them in that.
Absolutely. So I know that one of the questions on people's minds, and we've all sort of gone through this, and Kevin, maybe I'll start with you on this one, is that when you think about organizational culture or teamwork, how are you dealing with that when you're either in a virtual world fully, or as you return to work sort of that hybrid? So how does team and culture play in with this new third way of working?
Well, first off, like everything else, it requires us to be more creative and to think more intently about, well, what is it that causes us to be able to forge a culture in the first place, as opposed to just sort of being lazy about thinking about culture. And then once you realize what those are, then you can start trying to capture them. You can talk about them. You can actually have specific conversations about the elements of your culture that you want. And those conversations, as opposed to kind of letting it happen, ephemerally, like some form of weird black magic, can happen whether you're talking to each other in the same room or talking to each other on a call like this. And it can also allow you to identify, well, what were those moments when you were face to face that helped generate that culture? Because this is one of the points that I really believe is going to really make all businesses and people better as a consequence of this terrible exercise. And that is that we're going to not take personal time for granted nearly as much, hopefully forever, but certainly for the long term. And so identifying what those actions, what those conversations are when you're physically together, that help cement an organization, that help create the kind of culture, the kind of teamwork, and the kind of camaraderie that we all know supercharges organizations, and get on with it. Don't let those precious times be filled with nonsense or not even meeting. And I like to tell the story on myself. We have an office, a very important office in Toronto. In Toronto, I would go there in the good old days, 6-7 times a year. I would go to the Toronto office. But when I analyzed it, frequently I'd go to the Toronto office and they'd have I was a big enough deal. I got an office with a door, and a key. I had my own office, not a desk. I would go into my office in Toronto and close the door and have conference calls back with the folks in Edmonton or somewhere else. And if I really analyzed it, some of my trips, only 10 or 15% of my time was I actually interacting, physically with the folks in the Toronto office. Well, in whatever our next normal is going to be, our next iteration, I already know I'm going to identify how often do I really need to be in Toronto, and as much as possible, every minute's going to be used towards something productive, towards forging our teams together. So I think every business has a different kind of secret sauce for what kind of culture they want to build and what those elements are, but they're going to have to be more mindful of, well, specifically what kind of conversations, what kind of events, what kind of physical interactions, and then use that precious time much, much, much more productively.
Thank you for that. Karen, what are your thoughts about building culture and teamwork in this hybrid world?
Yeah, and this is kind of my jam, right? So, I mean, over the last 20 years, working in sport, working with teams, Team Canada, we've had to build culture remotely for years, and we've had to show up at games as a high performance team culture. I've also worked in industry for the last 10 years, helping organizations with this challenge. And I think Kevin is bang on. The very first thing that you need to do is have clarity. High five, Kevin. Is to have the clarity is what is the culture you want to have? I had this cool opportunity. I worked for a company that was formed out of the Seattle Seahawks. So it was Pete Carroll and their sports psych, and they formed this company. But I got to go observe the Seahawks for a week because he thought it would be helpful. I thought so too. Pete Carroll's a master at developing culture. And this is the thing is what is very clear on the culture you want to have. If you don't invest in a culture, you're going to get one anyway. And so it's that clarity piece. And then secondly, it's living in great consistency with that. So what are you reinforcing? And so the reinforces are artifacts. What are the things on the wall? Rituals. We know our beloved Flames, sorry, I'm a Calgarian, had the hard hat award. And it was this ugly, stinky hat, but the person who got it was behaving in the way consistent with how they want to be. And so having those rituals to reinforce. So I think it would be clarity would be one piece, and the reinforcers. Connection is a massive one, and purposeful connection. So you have the stand-ups, you have the one-on-one, the team huddles, but virtually you can do a drive-by just like you could in the office. So you set up a meeting, no agenda, just checking in. How you doing? Clarity, connection, opportunities to demonstrate appreciation and value. We all just want to know that we matter and that we're significant. So to build culture, how are we doing that remotely in those different ways? And then really it's about monitoring high performance team culture behaviors. So if we're operating as this, what are those key behaviors? And, we're communicating, we're getting results, we're attending to those in need, we're, whatever that is, and we're reinforcing and monitoring that. So there's that system of accountability. So there are just a few things. I mean, it's much deeper than that, but a few of the core pillars, if you like, of kind of cultivating this.
That's great. And Haylee, with your organization, I know that you often will have, first career job folks coming into the workplace. And so, in the last 10 months, you probably have some of those folks, or you want to actually make sure that your corporate culture is going out to your clients. So what are you seeing as far as either sharing the culture with your new team members or making sure your culture is effectively delivered as you go out into the client world?
Absolutely. And I actually think back to when I went through this recruitment process as a new grad myself from the U of A 7-ish years ago, and walking into several different firms. And let me just say, walking into EY, which I chose, I immediately felt like I belonged there. So I think it's an old adage. I don't know if it's right, but is it culture eats strategy for breakfast? I think. And when I came in, I just thought, okay, I'm home. I found the organization I want to work for. I didn't even know going in I actually thought it'd be a different one, but I came in and I knew. And so when I think about what leaders can do for folks who are joining in the virtual environment, I think there's so much that they can do. And I think it's just amplified now that we're remote. So the first thing that I would say is just making people feel that they matter. And I think Karen said those exact words. And what we've tried to do on a tactical level is when folks have been joining us during the pandemic, we've tried to have that first interaction in person, physically distanced somewhere, so that they can get a sense of who is their team, start to build trust with that team, and trust that, they're going to take care of that new person, and likewise, that new person's going to support the team. I think another important part with that is just assigning a peer. So I mentioned earlier that we kind of have this network of peer counselors. So really having those informal and formal networks of support within the organization have made such a major difference, because, I noticed that at least within my organization, I report to 10 different bosses at any one time, and so do all of my team members below me. So it's a matter of always having someone or 3 people at any one time that you can reach out to, you can talk to, you can bounce ideas off of, and you don't need to be working directly with them. And then I would also suggest that connecting them to those networks, whether it's a counseling network or say it's a network, a community of interest within your company. We've definitely done that with new folks who've come on board. We said, hey, we were so happy to have you join. Now you're supporting our recruitment network and you're going to help recruit the next group of people who come in. But really just being an empathetic leader, really checking in frequently. And I think that goes for new grads, and I think that and early career folks just as much as it goes for people at the top. and having them check in with each other. So that's what I would suggest, is checking in and probing, how are you really doing, and what can I do to make you feel like you belong?
You've said so much that I agree with, as so have you, Karen, by the way. But you talk about this a network for supporting each other and for building culture. And this is something that I keep saying, and I'm saying it more now that we're in this, surreal environment, which is that organizations, at least organizations the size of AIMCO, you have 400, 500 employees, as soon as you become an employee, you become part of the culture making. You can't sit around and just be what I call a culture taker and just sort of let the culture, surround you and you bob along like a cork on the water. Every single employee immediately becomes part of the process of making the culture. And that's very empowering for employees, whether they're straight out of college or from anywhere else, to say, wow, I don't have to wait for my boss or somebody else to sort of sprinkle this down from the top. We're creating this culture, and we encourage it, very, very much.
To bounce off that, one metaphor that we use is exactly that, and that's why the hiring process and the people you choose and what you're bringing into the culture, and it's almost like a pebble that you drop into the water and it ripples outwards. And so really what you're trying to do is if we can make individuals the best version of themselves, that's going to expand outward. In addition, the culture, if it's not healthy, it's like a tsunami that can squash that individual and doesn't allow them to shine. So it's kind of works both ways, right? So we need exactly that individual. They're a piece of the culture and they are going to define and make it, in addition to the organization responsibility to shape it and create the vision that they want.
So our time is flying by. I could talk to all of you all day long, but I realize that we've got about 10 minutes before we're going to start wrapping up. So I wanted to incorporate a few of the questions that our audience is asking, and it's the one that I think we've all experienced, which is, I'm going to call it Zoom fatigue, but it doesn't matter if it's Zoom or Teams or Google Meet or WebEx. How do we use this technology, which has been such a blessing when we can't get together, but how do we not overuse it? Or how do we drive engagement after hours? So there's questions there around volunteer fatigue or board fatigue, or the last thing I want to do is meet with my friends on Zoom after hours because I've already been on Zoom for like 8 hours. And so any advice from any of you about the balance between this great technology and also having its physical mental impact on people? Maybe Karen, you must have given this lots of thought.
Yeah, no, and there's some interesting science around it. And so I think, there's a few things. Is number one, the whole idea of demand and recovery, right? And what we're asking people is to go meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and I'm on this screen. And so it's almost the metaphor of, for those marathon trainers, there's a process called the 10-1. I run for 10 minutes and I walk for 1. It allows me to sustain the effort for a long time. Do not have a Zoom meeting longer than 45 minutes. Take a 15-minute break and then come back to it. So making sure you're embedding those things. I think there's also within Zoom, if you have your camera on, like right now I have my camera off, I cannot see myself. It's a lot of mental energy to look and and we're doing that kind of thing. And so there's all of these processes that go on within the video itself. So I think there's some techniques and tools. I was at a leadership summit last week. They had this platform where it wasn't just this. I went into a table and then I went to the pool. And so it had this different background where it's still boxes, but I'm moving, I'm controlling. So engaging new technologies in order to do that. So that's the one piece. Sorry, I'll just add one more. Sorry, guys, I just can't help myself. Is for the board fatigue, going back to the purpose. Right? So yes, we're all fatigued, the energy, but if you really look at, okay, why am I on this board? What's the core contribution? Okay, so if I impart my knowledge to help this, what impact can that have? So I think it's the why, which is looking at core contribution and impact that will have. And then does it make sense for you? If it doesn't, get off it, because you have to conserve your energy. Right? This is not the time to be the hero. It's the time to conserve and oxygen mask on first. Okay, sorry.
No, we value that. I'm going to ask both Haylee and Kevin, any thoughts on online fatigue?
Haylee?
Sure. Yeah. I think what I've seen done at EY and what I've been trying to do myself is to Karen's point, leave that little bit of time at the end of the meeting. Don't go meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. We don't, in a regular environment, you'd have time to walk between your classes as a student, or you'd have time to walk to your next meeting or another building or get a cup of coffee. So I preemptively book those into my day, and I encourage my team members to do the same and to go for walks outside. So never could I have imagined myself recommending that before, but now I do recommend that. I do it myself, and I let people know that I'm leaving my house and going outside for a minute because I'm going to bring something more to my rest of my afternoon, for example. So I think just being aware of it and then letting people know at the beginning of your meetings, hey, I'm just a little fatigued from being on video for a while, but I am super engaged. Just want you to know, I just want to turn my video off right now so I can really focus on what you're saying. I've had team members do that. And then also I kind of look and see which things in the day require that video, which things don't, and try and conserve energy where I can. That's been my approach, but Kevin, I'd be interesting to hear yours.
Well, Haylee, a lot of the things you talked about, I was going to say as well. First off, I think acknowledging it and talking about it helps. So, and I think to the extent that you're a leader, and by that I don't mean at the top of the house, but somebody who influences others, though it's very important for the influencers and the leaders to be the first to talk about it. One of the executives on the AIMCO team, because we're doing calls all through the day and through the night. The work day is sort of morphed into almost a 24-hour cycle. But she's done something I think really smart. She's now willing to say, I'm taking this call, but if you hear some noise in the background, it's because I'm taking this call while I feed my horses. She's a horse person. And that sends a signal to people, which is work is still important to me, but I'm figuring out ways to get the other stuff done, including work that I actually enjoy, but it's work. So whether it's going for a walk, any of that stuff, yesterday on Monday, I had an early meeting on Monday with one of the functional areas, and we all just started. I mean, there was maybe 10 on the call with, in 5 words or less, tell us about your weekend. 5 words or less, and so I think that's really, really important, is to acknowledge it and to lead by example, as you said, Haylee. Now that it's wintertime, I'll say, I need a break. I've promised myself I'm going to go put 5 pieces in the jigsaw puzzle that's on the dining room table, because no one uses their dining room table anymore. It's the jigsaw table, and I'm going to put 5 pieces in before I start my next call. And then it sort of empowers everyone else to say, hey, that's okay.
I love that. That's great. Well, in the spirit of 5 words or less, I'm going to ask each of you to respond to the final question, which is, let's say in a sentence or 2 or less, what's your best advice to our audience around how to handle this hybrid model of a workplace for the next 6 months? So I'm going to start with Haylee, and then Karen, and then Kevin. So just 2 sentences. If you want to go 5 words, you're welcome to do that. But
lead with empathy. That would be my number 1 thing.
I love that. Go ahead, Karen.
Ooh, 5 words or less. Oh, I've already used them. So yeah, I would, absolutely. Take care of your people. They're your biggest asset. Attend to individual differences, manage by objectives versus time at the clock, and take care of the emotional, mental, psychological needs just as much as the physical and tactical, technical.
It's okay. I wasn't going to bust you for that. Go ahead, Kevin.
I love following these 2 because they cover all the important stuff, and then I can pick on some little tiny thread. I would say over communicate. If people have been reading about the Swiss cheese theory for protecting yourself from the virus, there's sort of a Swiss cheese thing to communicating. Do the town hall meeting, have the intranet thing, have email, have the sort of cascading, managers talking to their teams. We have virtual coffees with Kevin, where I randomly get to have no coffee, bizarrely, with 10 employees. Just find 1,000 different ways to stay in touch with your employees from every angle of repose. If it's too much, people will dial it out and stop listening, but you want to make sure that you're communicating to every employee all the time and listening back.
Yeah, and I think just also picking up on what we've said across all of conversation today is, as one human being to another, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be talking about it. I think that's been the one thing that our whole society has changed a lot, is it's actually a lot safer to talk about. I'm not okay. I don't know what to do. There are no clear answers. What are you doing? Asking for help. So I really value that. Absolutely. So, and then the risk of home is that my wired in, phone is ringing in the background, 1960s house anyways. So on that note, I just want to give a personal thank you to the panel, and I'm just really value the conversation. I know we could talk about this for a while, but I'm going to hand it back to Sue and the Alberta
Jane,
School.
great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you all for being with us today, especially our panelists, Kevin, Haylee, and Karen, and then Jane, great job moderating. I hope those that tuned in today got lots of value out of this. I have certainly been taking notes, and I've got lots of great tips to follow through on. So thank you so much for coming. Tomorrow you will receive an email for those that attended that will ask you for your feedback. This is our first webinar or panel discussion that we've done as a School of Business, and we're looking at what the future might look for us in terms of virtual events. And we know there are lots of options out there, so we'd appreciate you giving your feedback. And again, thank you so much for tuning in today. This was fabulous. Take care, everyone.